And the corporate grip in our minds. And partly they succeed because we grow up corporate. I grew up corporate. You grew up corporate. You want me to test you? What do you think right now when I use the following words? Crime, violence, regulation, and welfare. Crime, violence, regulation, and welfare. What are the images? Street crime, wars, rapes, poor waiting for their checks, welfare checks, government regulation. To some degree, that's obviously true. But to a far greater degree, there is corporate crime that steals far more than larcenists or burglars. Corporate violence that destroys more lives than street crime by far. Corporate regulation of your lives. They're closing the courtroom door when you have a dispute with a company, like a credit card company or a bank. They make you go to binding arbitration. They take away your rights of personal injury under tort law. The contracts you sign mean nothing to you except slavery. They're all fine print. You sign on a dotted line. Allstate doesn't have a different policy than State Farm. GM dealer doesn't have a different policy than Ford. And it's all one-sided. You didn't add a word. You're supposed to sign on a dotted line, shut up and obey. And so they take away all your rights in the fine print. Student loan racket is an example of that. Insurance policies, bank cards that you fill out to get a deposit. You ever read them? You go into a hotel, not responsible for this, not responsible for that. What are you responsible for? Ripping us off? HMO is the same thing. You're on a stretcher going into a hospital, for heaven's sake. They want you to sign your rights away. The other day, a woman with leukemia was referred by her physician in Texas to MD Anderson Cancer Institute, one of the best in the country. She's sitting there in the office, filling out the forms to be admitted, serious case, and the clerk says, we can't admit you unless you give us a certified check for $110,000. Where else in the Western world do you die because you can't afford health care? 18,000 people in this country die because they can't afford health care, according to the Institute of Medicine and National Academy of Sciences, a pretty prestigious group. 16,000 people die from homicide. Now watch the comparisons in terms of preventable deaths that are attributed to corporate misdeeds and negligence. 58,000 people, according to OSHA, die every year in this country from occupational disease and trauma. 65,000 from air pollution, according to EPA. Almost 100,000 from medical negligence in hospitals. Need we go on to show what corporate violence is like and how preventable it is? Corporate regulation of our lives through government, using government to regulate us, is far greater than government regulation of our lives. Government is their agent to regulate us, but they regulate us directly. They get into our minds. Imagine hearing those words, crime, violence, regulation, welfare, and we don't even think corporate, because we grow up corporate. They color the way we look at products, like automobiles, so we don't demand better safety engineering. Till the mid-60s, we were really being sold a pile of junk. Gas-guzzling monsters where you get killed in 10-mile-an-hour collisions, huge repair bills, polluting cars. The engineers knowing how to remedy this in Detroit, not being allowed to. We never had a frame of reference as to what cars could be like until the mid-60s when we blew it open. And now over 1 million people, lives have been saved, tens of millions of injuries reduced, I mentioned. It's just thinking independently. Instead of growing up corporate, we grow up civic, like some of our greatest relatives, uncle, aunt, wife. Independent thinking, skeptical, doesn't take propaganda and swallow it, wants to get the facts directly. How long will this continue? Until we stop thinking it takes too much effort to get too little change. That's the Achilles heel of the citizen. I gave you some examples of the tobacco and nuclear warhead dismantling. I gave you some examples of the work we've done, regulating these industries, making them behave better before they counterattacked and took over Washington. But ask yourself this. You do things every day in your life that are far more difficult, far more painful, far more time-consuming than what I'm going to propose. You have to raise children. You have to rescue children from the streets or bad friends. You have to deal with accidents and sickness and grandparents who are ill. And there isn't enough home health care. This isn't Western Europe. Many of you have to work 2 jobs to make ends meet, and then you can't do that, and you're behind on your bills. People do a lot more difficult things than spending organized time in citizen and political action. First thing I ask you to do is to see that this Nader Gonzalez campaign gets on the Oregon ballot, and Oregon has become a quasi-fascistic state when it comes to independent and third-party candidacy. There are sign-up sheets up there where you can take away information, and we'll get back to you. One of 3 ways we have to go to get on the ballot: a convention, or signatures, thousands and thousands of them, or a small party. But your Secretary of State, who's in charge of exclusion of competition to the 2 parties, and knocked us off the ballot by changing the rules in 2004, after we'd complied with the rules we thought were the rules, is full of mischief. His name is Brad. He's a Democrat. He's elected. Someday, people like Bradbury would be prosecuted and put in jail for denying people their constitutional rights to be candidates on the ballot in all kinds of ways. Jim Crow against minority voter rights, we thought we dealt with in the South and elsewhere. There are Jim Crow type laws preserving the 2-party elected dictatorship against competition from third parties by saying to the voters who want different kind of candidates, we're not going to let you vote for these candidates because we're going to keep them off the ballot because we've written the laws and we've got the partisan judges and we've got the partisan Secretary of State. Do you imagine what this does to any sense that we're a democratic society? You remember when the Soviet Union would proudly announce the Kremlin after the election, 97% of the Soviet people voted, and we would all laugh? Don't you know why we laugh? Because there's only one candidate on each ballot line. Welcome to America. 90% of the House of Representatives district, there's only really one candidate, the incumbent. They carve up the districts, the Democratic Republicans, they can't even stand to compete with one another. I mean, they're getting to look like one another. I can see a case of mistaken identity, why they don't think it makes that much difference. 60% of the state legislators in Massachusetts have no opposing party opponent in the election. Just walk in. Maybe it's about 35% here. That's not democracy. Democracy involves an election, which involves a contest, which has at least 2. It's a coronation. You see anybody marching on this? We've got to cultivate a sense of civic indignation. We can know all these things, but if we don't have fire in our belly, if we don't look back at what our forebears suffered to give us what we have in this country that we're lunching on, if we don't have a sense of what we're going to say to our descendants, if we don't have a sense of shame and self-respect, no matter how much we know, how much information about injustice there is, how many solutions are on the shelf, very practical, can be put into effect, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So we need to develop the language of civic indignation, not flying off the handle and losing control of yourself. What the psychologists now have daintily called emotional intelligence, to go with your rational intelligence. Now I keep saying you, but it really isn't so much you, because it's the people out there who have given up on themselves. You've probably been involved in a lot of activity. But people do rationalize their own futility repeatedly. They have all kinds of excuses why they don't show up, why they can't fight City Hall, why they can't challenge this, why they can't build that for a better society. And they get themselves in their personal lives and try to make it through life, little recreation, work, vacation, try to pay the bills, just stay out of the public arena. That's not what a functioning democracy is all about. We have so many solutions to energy, to housing, to public transit, to pollution control, converting our society to all kinds of benign solar energy, getting rid of subsidized corn ethanol that is increasing food prices. That was a huge movement, but we have. People have a sense of fair play. It doesn't matter whether they're Republicans or Democrats. You hear Obama say again and again, we are one people, we are one nation, we must be united. I say, against what? For what? We must be united to reassert the sovereignty of the people over their country and their futures against these giant corporations that are destroying our democracy. If you look at our website, votenader.org, I hope you remember it, votenader.org, you'll see daily what we're doing, where we're going, what we're proposing. We have one page as a line down the middle, McCain, Obama, Clinton, corporate candidates, Nader, Gonzalez, what's on the table for us, off the table for them. Reversing direction in the Middle East, single-payer health insurance, a unique type of obvious tax system where you first tax the things we like the least or dislike the most. Before we tax human labor and necessities of life as we do now, we should tax security speculation. $500 trillion of Wall Street security speculation, which will produce huge revenues to reduce the federal income tax load on working families. We should tax gambling. We should tax the addictive industries. We should tax pollution, carbon tax. We should tax the things we like the least and dislike the most. We believe in opening up the presidential debates so that more voices can be heard. The majority of polls wanted me on the presidential debates in 2000, 2004. We should have an aggressive crackdown on corporate crime, fraud, and abuse. The other candidates don't even talk about it, even though the business press reports it day after day. We should initiate immediate impeachment proceedings to impeach Bush Cheney. To nuclear power, and yes, to solar energy. Yeah. Cut the huge, wasteful military budget. Obama, Clinton, and McCain want to increase it, expand it, devour the federal budget, deprive people of the necessities of life that a government should be able to address, like clean drinking water and clean air. Now, I'll be back for a Q&A, but I do want you, if you can, to get your friends and neighbors, even if they don't want to contribute or vote to Nader Gonzalez, just to sign in on our email list so they get a broader frame of reference for the presidential campaign, so they can better evaluate what's going on in the two parties, so they can see what the real redirections of the country are all about. Our positions are supported again and again by the majority of the American people. Isn't that ironic? But because we have an exclusionary political system, we're number 3 in the polls. And yet we represent the majority of the American people. 81% of the people polled say the country's going in the wrong directions. How many people believe that? Okay. 61% of the people think that the two major parties are failing. Gallup poll. Okay. 75% of people think corporations have too much control over their lives. That's a Business Week poll.
Yeah.
Okay, so why aren't we number one? Because they've rigged the system, that's why. Because they keep us out of the debates, which is the only way to reach tens of millions of people, because they control this corporation that's called the Presidential Debate Commission, the Republican Democratic Party. They created it and controlled it 20 years ago. So let's go forward, and in the process, get more people to get on our email list, provoke discussion, pick up some of these buttons and pennants and bumper stickers. That stimulates discussion in the neighborhood when you have these kinds of buttons or bumper stickers, and start a lot of personal conversations. Word of mouth is the most powerful form of communication. It goes from relative to relative, friend to friend, neighbor to neighbor, worker to worker. It can go with lightning speed and considerable credibility. Don't think if it's not on the internet, on the news, that you can't spread the word. And on that point, I want to introduce a lawyer who's known to many. How many of you know Greg Kaffour? He's a really great lawyer in Portland. For years, he's represented citizens who've been stomped on by government agencies or corporations, the kind of lawyer that is all too rare. Most lawyers represent commercial interests. He represents the interests of citizens who are trying to make a difference. He believes dissent is the mother of most assent. It must be protected and defended. And together with Lloyd and others, they are the only people in the United States of America, after 15 years of work, initiatives, lawsuits, discussion, have shut down a giant nuclear plant.
Yeah.
The Trojan nuclear plant. Let me introduce you to Greg Kaffour, and then I'll be back for discussion. And pursuing justice is fun, let's face it. It's the great work of human beings on earth. Look at all the things you like about your lives. At one time, people weren't allowed to live those kinds of lives. So let's not make justice and clean politics and a presidential race to vote for people you believe in and not vote for the least worst. Let's not make it just a chore. It's a blessing. It's a joy. It's a spirit. Senator Daniel Webster once put it well many, many years ago when he said, justice is the great work of human beings on earth. And always remember that definition of freedom by Cicero. Freedom is participation in power. That's the one that grounds it in terms of our own shaping of our future. I always don't really like models much, but you know, Obama has this yes we can. Is that what he means? I'd like our motto to be, we, the people, will decide. Thank you. Great.
Aside from Lloyd Marvett and I, Mark McDougall, Dan Meek, Linda Williams, how many people had a hand in closing down Trojan? How many people in this room? Raise your hand. How many people were in on it? How many people in this room were in on bringing down Trojan? How many people had a role in it? How many people? Look at how many. How many of you have had a chance to sign the sheet with your email and your other information so we can scan it? Who hasn't had it come by them? Okay, folks, can you see where the rows may be where people haven't had a chance to sign in? We've got to stay in touch. It's the lifeblood. If you think about the world without Ralph Nader, you think about cars without seatbelts or airbags, without auto safety legislation, without the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act, the Freedom of Information Act, mine safety, poultry made more safe, meat made more safe, OSHA, The list goes on and on and on, all the organizations that he spawned. And when you look at a campaign like this, you say, well, what are the range of outcomes? Let me give you sort of a minimalist response. Did you notice John Edwards this year? An imperfect vessel, as they say. But his campaign had a theme which was repeated in his ads in Iowa. It said, people say that if we just change a bunch of corporate Republicans for a bunch of corporate Democrats, things will change. It's not true, he said. It's a lie. And some astute commentators said, no, this guy's channeling Ralph Nader. And it was true. It's an extraordinary breakthrough that the distinction is not corporate, is not Republicans and Democrats. The distinction is between those who are in the pocket of the corporations and those who are not. That the struggle is between people and corporations over the human fate. One result of Ralph Nader's serious foot in the door in prying open the public debate, because if you don't have the right analysis, you're never going to get the right solutions. And the common thread of all that ails us is our domination by corporate power. From that flows all the ills of society, and empowering people, from that flows all the solutions. So I ask you to imagine a debate, a presidential debate in which Ralph Nader's there. And imagine if 40 million people is able to say, Senator Obama, you say that when we discuss reform of our health system, of course, the health insurance companies have to have a seat at the table. Well, you know, if you're going to give them veto power, if they have to sign off on the deal, then we have to ask you the basic question. Are they part of the solution, or are they the problem? I mean, how does the health insurance industry make money? It makes money just one way, denying coverage. Saying no, we won't pay for this. No, you can't have that procedure. No, you can't have that treatment. Every time they do, they make more money. Wow. These people are going to sign on to the new health bill. You know what that means. It means huge federal taxpayer subsidies for health insurance until that goes broke, and we're back in the soup, only it's worse. Because they're the enemy. They're the ones we have to overcome. All those people who make their living saying no, all those people in the back room figuring out ways to say no, communicating the message no, reviewing the documents so they can say no, all those people need to go out and get honest work, and all the money that goes to their salaries should go to healers instead. Tell me, Senator Obama, do you agree with that or not? Tell us your answer. Tell me, Senator Obama, you support more money for defense. Half the budget goes to defense. Right now, we call it defense. We spend more on defense than the rest of the world put together. You want to spend more. And of course, the wars are off the budget. They don't count. What is the problem here? Is the problem that we're not spending enough? Is that the real problem with our foreign policy, our domestic policy? We're not spending enough? Or do you think maybe the problem is things like occupation? While we're talking about occupation, you talk about how you got to keep troops in Iraq so that things work out better, so we can train in the army, so we can protect the vast green zone, so we can attack terrorists, which I guess means those that don't like us there and have courage to stand up to it. But you're going to be bringing some troops home. Now, what is it? Is the occupation the problem, or is the occupation the solution? Is the occupation what breeds the resistance, or is the occupation what needs to continue until the resistance is beaten down? You got a foot in each camp, and you know, Senator, your presidency is going to be destroyed if you don't get both feet in the right camp, because we've been down that road before. What do you think of that, Senator Obama? Could we have that debate? Is that a possibility? Well, let me say this. In the 2000 election, Ralph Nader was at 5% in the polls during the campaign. But Barry Burden of Harvard studied a different question. He said, among the three candidates, who would you like to see president? Who do you think would be the best president? Got a wholly different number. Nader's number was 15%. Think about that for a minute. What is Ralph's number today? A couple months ago in Zogby was 5% with Obama and McCain, 6% with Clinton and McCain. Today, in the National Journal poll, Nader's at 5%, coming equally from Republicans and Democrats. That's real news. You may not see it in the paper tomorrow, but if you look on the web, you'll see it. So let me say, what is the potential? Potential's a lot more than you think if you just hang out with, pseudo-liberal party hacks, because ordinary people don't feel the way they do. And there is extraordinary news in the world that gives me inestimable pleasure to share with you. Do you know where Ralph and a handful of us spent yesterday afternoon? We were at Mountain View, a little town in California. That's the headquarters of a very large and remarkable corporation. Mr. Nader was invited there to speak to its employees, and his Q&A session, which was long on answers, very detailed and thoughtful answers, of course, was not just shown to the people there in the audience, but it was beamed to the 20,000 employees worldwide of that corporation. And that corporation wants to put on its own debates, presidential debates. And that corporation is a corporation that McCain or Obama cannot say no to because their name is Google. Yeah! Over the next few months, as this is churning, rattling around in their brain, being discussed, they're very egalitarian. The top guys and the ordinary grunts are all, sort of intermixed over there. They have this non-hierarchical form, and everybody's encouraged to talk about these. You should have seen Ralph, and let me tell you, you can't. You go home tonight, just punch in Nader Google, and you can see Nader's address to these people. And it was an opportunity where a lesser man would have felt some compulsion to flatter his audience. Ralph talked about things like Tiananmen Square, which if you type it in on Google in the United States, you see these extraordinary and horrific pictures. But if you type it in China, where Google has the contract for the web, you see pretty pictures. Okay? And he talked about that. He talked about, kids, he said that this is one of those places where, I don't know what they do to kids at 30, but they're anything. He says, think about what you're producing. You produce all this information, this miracle, massive information, these great retrieval systems. Is the world a better place for it? Where's the evidence of it? Are you, in fact, studying more and more, learning more and more about less and less and less and less, and just spiraling downward in relevance as you get more and more intense in your knowledge of less and less? Maybe you need to start thinking about spiraling the other way. What's going to be the end product? We've got all the data. What are you going to be doing? What are you in this community of scholars going to be doing to create information which becomes knowledge, which becomes wisdom, which can be turned into action, which can make the world a better place? That's what Ralph talked about with these kids at Google, and they were goggle-eyed. It was an extraordinary experience. You can see it for yourself. Don't let them sit around with their bosses and kick around who should be in the debates that Google wants to sponsor. Now we have a right-wing candidate, Congressman Barr, who is against big intrusive government, things like the Patriot Act and so on, corporate welfare. I mean, the guy's got a lot to say. That would be an interesting debate with the four of them, don't you think? Yeah. Now let me say this. How might that happen? Well, we have to show our capability. We have to show a level of support. We have to be on the ballot in a vast number of states. We have to have enough money to maintain a serious campaign, because we're on a razor's edge right now. We're going to be frozen out by the national media. On the other hand, we have this extraordinary opportunity and an extraordinarily promising base of support out there in the public. It's there in the polls. It's not me telling you.
Thank you very much, Greg. He's been volunteering with us since 2000. All of the time. He practices what he preaches and preaches what he practices. Thank you all for your generosity as well. It's hard up here because of these lights to see you clearly in the audience, but there is a PA, yeah, right here. Those who want to come, you can, if you want to make an announcement that one of your citizen groups has a meeting to deal with improving life in Oregon, make it. If you want to ask a question or make a suggestion or comment on the website, whatever.
Hey, Ralph, thanks for coming. My name is Joe Rowe. I'm a teacher at Benson High School. And first off, as a teacher, if you want to volunteer, if you're bored, just walk into the main office, you go through, like a little background check, and then the next day you can volunteer. I want to thank you for running.
Can you pull that up?
Oh yeah, I'll pull it up. Sorry, I'm not coming through. It's frozen, I'll just hold it. So here we go. Thanks. Again, so if you want to volunteer at Jefferson High School, we really need volunteers. It's a school that's hemorrhaging because of parent choice. And if you listen to the media, our school is dangerous, and if you live in the neighborhood, you might be afraid about sending your student to what the media portrays as a dangerous school, but don't believe the media. I also teach newspaper there, so look for our newspaper in the neighborhood businesses. So thanks for coming around. I'm really glad you're here. The night when Bush stole Florida, I was sitting in a room with your running mate, Mac Gonzalez, in San Francisco. I was a teacher in San Francisco also. I couldn't afford to live there. My friend, Mark Sanchez, decided to run for office in his backyard one summer because we had been protesting at school board meetings. So what did we do? 5 teachers ran a teacher for school board. We had no place to hold a campaign party, and Mac Gonzalez was running against someone who we hated. Her name was Juanita Owens. And not only did Mac keep Juanita Owens off the city council, Mac Gonzalez got on. So I want to thank you for all your connections to the community. I mean, there's things that happen. And the reason why I tell that story is because it's happening again in Portland. I'm wearing a shirt that says impeach. Joe Walsh is running for House against Earl Blumenauer. And all those people who cheered for impeachment, if you're voting for Earl Blumenauer, you're voting against your own insanity. If you're voting for Jeff Merkley, search his website, Jeff Merkley. Yes, I have a question, I'm getting to it. And what Ralph said, actually, you don't have to have a question. You have to come up and say you're with a community group. So let me talk. Thanks. I also emailed Mr. Kafori, whose son I helped extensively, and neither Mr. Kafori nor his son had the respect of replying to my calls and emails to speak. So I'm here. Okay.
Okay, you gotta give people a little time. Can you let someone else?
Yeah, so I will give people more time, but here's the point. If you raise your hand and you're against impeachment and you're voting for Blumenauer or Merkley, you're self-destructive. Vote for Joe Walsh. Vote for Novick. They have statements on their websites against impeachment. It's that simple. Okay, if you want to come, Ralph, you told me nothing new. I knew that Clinton said she's going to obliterate, Iran. Look,
when the Democrats...
Ralph, I heard you invite people up to make community announcements. I'm saying, come out come out and help Joe Walsh get elected. And come out and help Joe.
When the Democrats won in 2006 November, control of the Congress, first thing they did was take impeachment off the table. This is impeaching a president whose party stole the election from him in 2000 in Florida. You figure.
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm from the Portland 9/11 Truth Alliance. And the biggest crime that's happening right now is the use of depleted uranium. It's President Clark and Clinton and Bush. And I'd like to see them hung for the use of depleted uranium. Can you please speak on the crime of depleted uranium, please?
On depleted uranium?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's used, as a coating on shells to harden the shells, tank artillery shells, and it leaves behind a pretty toxic, deadly environment, kids playing around in the soil and grass among trees. It should be a war crime. It should be like cluster bombs. Cluster bombs are now legal, and they tear apart mostly kids and civilians, and they stay there unexploded for years. Kids in South Lebanon think they look like toys, and they do look like toys when the Israelis left over 1 million of them there in 2006. But there are now 100 countries who have signed on to a treaty to ban the production and distribution and use of cluster bombs. Depleted uranium should be on that list. Guess what? The United States is not one of those 100 countries, because we produce and sell cluster bombs. It's the two parties. It isn't just one party. They're all very complicit with these kinds of situations.
My name is Jim. Welcome to Portland, Mr. Nader. Thank you for the clarity. All my friends look forward to when you show up here. And I just returned from a teaching on liquefied natural gas, which is something that is with mega corporations, mainly from industry, from the electronics and all the energy industries, I should say, are trying to bring this to Oregon. And I wonder if you have any comments on the use of liquefied natural gas or just energy in general.
We waste between 50 and 75% of our energy as judged by practical available technology today. So before we go into building nuclear plants and bringing liquefied natural gas and huge tankers from abroad, why don't we put that money, instead of in those forms of energy, which are hazardous, into energy efficient technologies like refrigerators, all kinds of appliances, air conditioning, heating systems, electric generating plants, motor vehicles, because it reduces the sales for these industries. Conservation of energy reduces Exxon sales. You have a motor vehicle 70 miles per gallon, Exxon's going to sell you less gasoline. So these corporations have a built-in vested interest against some competitors, little competitors who are trying to change things, in waste. And so anybody says, why should we invest in nuclear power? Should we invest in liquid LNG? Let's invest first in reducing the waste of the energy we have. A megawatt of electricity you don't have to waste is a megawatt you don't have to produce, whether by coal or any other form of fuel, as we convert our country to the most benign forms of renewable energy, solar, geothermal. So, you know, if one of those LNG tankers goes up, goodbye Portland. I mean, if it's in the Bay of Portland. This is a huge, huge explosion, like bigger than Texas City 100 and some years ago.
What is your understanding of why we have no progress?
What is your understanding of why we've had no progress toward impeachment and how we still could accomplish it?
Well, I've been talking with John Conyers, an old friend of mine, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, so is former Senator McGovern and others, to have an impeachment hearing. And when he said no, Pelosi and Steny Hoyer don't want it either, his superiors. I asked him why. And he said, well, he doesn't want to turn Bush into a victim. He doesn't want to distract from existing legislation Democrats are pushing. And he besides doesn't have the vote. I said, on that grounds, John, there wouldn't have been a civil rights progress on Capitol Hill. The real reason, I think, is they don't have the fortitude of their forebears. The Democrats were moving to certain impeachment conviction of Nixon and Watergate. Watergate was a one-time episode. This happens every day. The war in Iraq, spying, the throwing people in jail without habeas corpus protection, torture. They're a different breed up there. And part of it is because we don't put any pressure on them. There are some groups pushing for impeachment. They have email lists and so on. But we're not putting enough pressure on him. We put enough pressure on Conyers that he's now started torture hearings. But he doesn't want to use the word impeachment. So at least we've gotten to one impeachable offense without the dreaded word impeachment. What would James Madison and Thomas Jefferson? Now, George W. Bush is exactly why they put the impeachment authority in the U.S. Constitution.
Do you believe it can still be accomplished? Pardon? Do you believe it could still be accomplished?
Yes, as I said in the column that's on my website, on the website, Nader.org, it is never too late for impeachment. It is never too late to bring these people to justice. This idea, they can move very fast if they want. Their files are full with documents and incriminating materials. The official reports, the whistleblowers, the people who testify under oath. Bush has admitted to 2 impeachable offenses without using the phrase. One is spying on Americans without judicial warrant, a 5-year prison term maximum felony, and imprisoning Americans without charges. I mean, that's a matter of record. So he's an easily impeachable president. But you've raised Congress. The way we turn this country around, the one easy way, is to control Congress. 535 men and women put their shoes on every day like you do. 1,500 corporations who don't have a single vote get their way with the majority of these 535 men and women. And we've got the vote back in the district. If you develop Congress watchdog groups in every congressional district, 1,000 people out of 650,000 in a congressional district. That's all. 1,000 people, $100 each, 100 hours each, volunteer, full-time staff, and full-time office in each congressional district, pushing these major redirections that are long overdue and supported by the American people, like single-payer health insurance. You cannot believe how fast they turn around. There's nothing out there back home. You got the special interests and the commercial interests, the single-issue people. You don't have people pushing for the general interest. You would be stunned how fast they would turn around. Because the only thing they really want is votes. And they raise a lot of money because they think they get votes by advertising and so on. But we've got the votes. We just haven't used it in a structured way. Imagine having your representatives in this auditorium 6 times a year, and you lay the agenda, and they know you represent tens of thousands of people in each district on these long overdue changes for the American people. How many people would like to belong to such a Congress watchdog group? It's great. Listen, it isn't even as intense as professional bird watchers. Have you ever met a serious bird watcher? Up at dawn, into the marshes, binoculars, cameras, pads, pencils. Imagine if we had that intensity watching Congress. Yes.
You hear me?
Yes.
I'm Ron Vanilla, following Ralph Nader for 45 years. And Ralph, I want you to talk about the national deficit, which in 2010 now, we think about $13 trillion. It's hanging like a sort of Damocles, economic Damocles, or whatever you want to call it, over the heads of our children. Talk a little about that.
Huge. Bush is basically making the children and grandchildren of America pay for the war. It's $14 million an hour, 24 hours a day, the war in Iraq. Just think, $14 million an hour, and it's financed by deficit spending. In every other war in America's history, the President and the Congress have raised taxes to pay for it, but not this one. So when Bush says, I'm not going to cut your taxes, he's basically saying, I'm going to increase the taxes at a horrendous level for your children and grandchildren. He has, do you know that 80% of the entire $9–10 trillion debt was under Republican presidents, like Reagan and Bush. They're the ones that really know how to build up deficits. And we don't make enough of that because it's in the future. Maybe they'll inflate the dollar and pay it off that way. But you know who pays when you inflate the dollar? The average consumer. That's a dangerous way to do it. Print money. I don't know what's wrong with our low level of civic indignation. I really don't. I attribute it, I mean, we've all got our theories, right? I mean, who really knows? I think that we've been beaten into the ground from when we're 3 years old, being taught to believe and not to think. Not having any civic skill courses in our elementary and high school, so we have a sense of practicing democracy and challenging power. And spending 50 hours a week watching screens. Television, internet, video. What does that do to the brain? Other than reduce attention span. Something's happening to us. We have great communication capability. We could reach each other free through the internet, all kinds of ways to gather people, and it's not happening. That's why I was talking to Google yesterday about it. It's not happening. People actually had huge rallies without any electricity or anything. You know, during the campaign, I was toying with having one county in Colorado where people would campaign for us, using no technology that was available for the last 108 years. So they have to use horses, and they have to use word of mouth, and they have to use their feet. And I said to myself, you know, I think they'd actually get a higher vote for me if they used horses door to door and had gatherings in living rooms by knocking on doors and passing out leaflets. It's really getting very, very strange what this virtual reality of communications and internet is doing to us. When you retrieve information, it's great. Tell you about a meeting is great. But mobilizing citizens is too cool. It's too cool a medium. Yes.
What do you see what do you think the consequences of the expanse of executive authority will be, and what are some solutions that can head that off?
Well, that's what the 9/11 strike did for Bush. He turned it into a huge concentrator of power in the White House that dispensed Congress and the judiciary, diverted attention to the necessities of the people, and made his corporate buddies very rich and chilled out the Democrats. We are two major terrorist attacks on the police state because our reaction as a people is not to heed Benjamin. Those who trade freedom for security deserve neither. And you get someone in the White House after a major terrorist strike, they can concentrate huge power in the White House and move into a police state dragnet type of action. Look at what's happened after 9/11. I mean, the British were bombed by the Nazis every night in London from September 1939 to May 1940, and they didn't give up their liberties the way we've given them up. So we have to be very worried about the terrorists abroad who see the way we have trembled and somersaulted and spent trillions of dollars and gotten ourselves in a nervous breakdown and followed this messianic militarist in the White House with one strike. They're saying, you know, we sort of blew our wad on this one strike. We had no second strike capability. But can you imagine what we did to this powerful country? And if we're not ready for that, to defend our constitutional system and habeas corpus and due process and our freedom, you'll never recognize this country after two major terrorist strikes, stateless terrorist strikes. And Bob Barr, running for the Libertarian now, he's very worried about that too. Much more worried about the Republican Democrat. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Art Kahn. I had never given money to a candidate before, ever. And the $250 feels good. Everybody else is I just want to ask a couple of quick questions about just, I guess, the subtleties of some of the policies. On the little paper you handed out, it says, total U.S. military and corporate withdrawal from Iraq. And I guess my question there is, what moral obligation does America have to the people of Iraq?
Great moral obligation. That's why,
We broke it.
yeah, we broke it. And that's why we must continue humanitarian aid. We knocked the bottom out of the insurgency by giving them back their country and their oil, and they negotiated 6-month withdrawal. I know a lot about that area. I specialized in it and studied the language. They will resist forever our occupation. This is the way we would if we were occupied. And when a foreign country occupies another country and prefers one sectarian group against another, boom, it's going to explode. Revenge, killing, slaughter, and so on. Imagine if a giant military power came and preferred Protestants against Catholics, threw the Catholics out of work, etc., threw them in prison. Boom, it would explode. Even though they were neighbors and they intermarried, as Shiites and Sunnis did. And, you know, they had doctrinal differences, but it's no big deal. They went to many of the same mosques. They didn't fight each other for 1,300 years, as the propagandists, neocons, like to tell us. We owe them humanitarian aid, but we've got to get out of their lives so they can, that's why I use the word negotiate. So if you sit them down and say, look, you know what the alternative is, it's a nightmare. We're going to give you back your oil, your country, you all have a stake, the tribal leaders, religious leaders still have a lot of authority, and we're going to continue humanitarian aid. It'll cost the American taxpayer a fraction of the $14 million an hour it's now costing, and not counting the blood of American soldiers. I think that's the way to do it. They don't believe us now when they hear our government say, well, we'll get out of Iraq, you know, we'll deploy fewer troops. They just don't believe us. We got 22 bases there. 3 of them are multi-billion-dollar bases, as if they're out of the Starship Galactica or something. I mean, really modern, heavy stuff. They just don't believe we're going to ever leave, and they're just going to do more and more to try to get us out of it. We owe them a huge debt. They never threatened us. You've got 25% of the country refugees, half of the 25% Jordan and Syria. Nobody ever pays much attention to them. And there's severe malnutrition, infant mortality, dangerous streets, diseased drinking water, have food problems. It's horrible. You know, shells, bombs, cluster bombs, everywhere. It's horrible. And so we do owe them that. We owe them, and by the way, there are about 50 to 100,000 of them. They collaborated with us. They were the translators. They're the ones who risked their lives to help the soldiers topple Saddam. They never dreamed that it would continue. And we won't let any of them in this country. We let 150 to 200,000 Vietnamese in this country after we blew that country apart. And we've only let 6,000 in Iraqis who risked their lives and often saved our lives of our soldiers by telling them, watch out this, don't go down this alley. You know Sweden, how many Iraqis? Sweden, little Sweden, 8 million people. They've let in 22,000 Iraqis, refugees. We won't even let in the ones that help save American soldiers' lives. So it's just cruel. No wonder they hate us so bad. They hate who represents us.